I casually asked ChatGPT a few days back about what it thinks about the grueling 12 to 15 hours a day work day in general, right? That people have been glorifying. And I also spoke to it about how is it that people can sustain within 4 to 5 hours of sleep if they end up working 12 to 15 hours. And is there any background to it, considering the fact that from what I know or the research that I have done, there's ample evidence and research papers that show that the brain cannot sustain more than 4 to 5 hours of good cognitive load in a particular day. So yeah, so my curiosity then it hands it quite a bit, and then my curiosity became a topic of conversation that is coming to you as a session. But before proceeding, so we have some very interesting things to talk about on this topic. But before going further into it, I want to thank my friend Gans. He lives in Austin, Texas. He sent me this wonderful microphone from the US a couple of weeks ago. Thank you, Gans. Now, into the topic. I think pretty much everyone knows that this topic comes up quite often, particularly from LinkedIn circles, or you'll find that in Twitter, where either Narayana Swami or a couple of other people, I'll get into that as well in terms of what they mean. They bring up that we need to hustle, we need to work very hard, and that's how you grow and the economy grows or the company grows, etc. GDP improves, and a lot of related statements that kind of idolizes or encourages the hustle culture. So we'll go a little deeper into that. But where I came from or analyzed from is looking at why 7 to 8 hours of sleep is very important. So biologically, I figured that sleep is not just rest; it's a kind of an active and reset system for the body, right? Right from your memory consolidation through the day, emotional regulation, and your eating, your hormonal balance, pretty much detox and repair your right from your muscles to cells to everything gets cleaned up. Your brain's lymphatic system, clears up your waste every night you sleep. Your testosterone production happens in the night. So I don't have to go deep into it. We need a separate session on sleep, but considering knowing the importance of sleep, then I was very curious to find out how is it that there are some people able to consistently do 12 to 15 hours or even more, those accomplished, let's say, top-notch lawyers or investment bankers, consultants, etc., or some startup founders. How are they able to? Is there something that other humans can follow, whatever they do, that helps them work longer hours? Or is it just a myth, or is it unsustainable and deleterious to your health in the long run? Let's take a deeper look at it. First, number one, why this 12, 15 hours or plus number of hours? I mean, it doesn't matter, but anything more than that, I think 12 to 15 is kind of glorified. Why is it glorified? That's the first topic that we need to probably look at. Now, you understand this 8 hour work structure itself was done during the manual labor time or the industrial revolution time frame, where they said 8 hours of 8 to 9 hours of productive labor is required, and then 8 hours, of course, you spend time sleeping, and the remaining time you spend for yourself along with preparatory work to go to work. Every other thing that taking care of family and other things. Obviously, life doesn't revolve just around work and sleep, right? So you have the remaining 8 hours to manage other things. So, but what changed, right? I think in towards the late 1990s is when I think things changed. I don't think I've seen my father work late as he worked in State Bank. He came back home by around, maybe the office probably ended at 5:30 or 6. He came home by around 7:30, depending on the time it took for him to reach from office to home. And then he was at home, and then he left for office at 7:30 in the next morning. But towards the end of 1900s, I think, along with the rise, probably around the startup and the IT boom, that's when the internet was becoming famous. Your .com was uh, prevalent. I think around that time, this slowly the Silicon Valley culture became kind of started spreading its wings, and the grind mentality started, and that's when social media towards the early 2000s, maybe 2005, 2008, and at the time frame, they started glorifying the hustle culture, making it kind of a peak aspirational status to attain for the normal people. So that in the sense that if you didn't really work for 15, 16 hours a day, you were considered kind of inferior. So yeah. So I think this is probably the genesis from which this hustle culture started, became more prevalent in the society. I don't think it existed before that. In fact, now if you look at it, the Gen Zs are reversing it. Kind of they're saying F off. I'm leaving work at 5:30. I have my own life. We'll get to that towards the end. But what is this hustle culture? Right? It kind of promotes the idea that there's always more and more to strive for, and essentially it means when they say more, it it's around measurable things or tied to status. That's either a title or promotion to secure, a higher ceiling to break, and more money to make. So essentially, the status around title and money. Title and money in a company is what the hustle culture promoted. It legitimized the idea that to be successful and get anything meaningful done, you have to be doing very long hours. That's what is done by a lot of people. Now, there are many reasons people did that. I do think that if you are a startup and if you're starting up very early, considering pretty much everyone employs similar type of people, you definitely need to be stretching a little bit than the other companies. Otherwise, it's very difficult to compete the existing companies that move at a similar pace, right? So, and I think the startups are a kind of a I wouldn't say it's par for the course. Startups are a different kind of a beast because if people who join the startups, admittedly, they know that getting into this demands these kind of workers, and also startups for them to compete with the established behemoths in the industry and to be able to uh, break themselves into reckoning or into reckoning, they have to do a little more, that maybe around 10 to 15% more than the average person does. So does it require 15, 18 hours? I don't know, but definitely it requires more than the normal average working hours that people will want to typically put. Okay, cool. But then where is this notion of 17 hours, 18 hours, 70-hour work week and 100-hour work week that's coming from, right? Now, some of the things is people equate long hours worked with value created, which is probably not true all the time. The other thing is there is what they call a survivorship bias, where people look at suddenly some maybe some guys like Elon Musk, Jobs, and or a few other characters, who are extremely successful, and think that if they can do it and they become successful, they also can, and forgetting the fact that about 99.99% of the rest of the people literally burned out or failed, right? So that's probably some of the reasons. Let's get to the third section. We'll go a little bit into what actually science shows and then go into what kind of changes happening in the society, and I'll leave it open for some discussion. So basically what science actually shows is your cognitive low productivity drops very, very sharply after 6 to 8 hours of work. And I would say in the 6 to 8 hours of work, about 4 to 5 hours of very intense focused work that requires good cognitive focus, or let's say a lot of brain energy, right? That requires beyond that, your the kind of output that you provide is not really going to move the needle. Sleep debt accumulates and affects mood, decision making, creativity, and reaction time, even if you feel okay. Studies on knowledge workers show that most deep cognitive output happens in 4 to 6 hours of focused hours per day. Athletes, writers, scientists who produce very high quality work often sleep more, not less. So these are some, uh, let's say, facts that I found out from research in ChatGPT. Yes, glorifying 12 to 15 hours per day is largely unsustainable and counterproductive in the long run. Yeah, let's see a lot more data that it says. Numerous studies across psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics show that the brain's ability to engage in sustained high quality cognitive work is limited to about 4 to 6 hours a day, even for elite performers. Now, this why am I stressing on the elite performers? Right now, elite performers have a bunch of other things going extremely well for them. That's in they sleep well, they take adequate amount of good nutrition, and they work out very regularly. So that their mind and the body is in possibly the best state. And even for them, apparently 4 to 6 hours a day is considered quite a load. Okay, cool. Let's look at a little bit of some research that we looked at. There's an Anders Ericsson's 10,000-hour rule research studied elite violinist, chess players, and athletes. Found that they practiced about 3 to 4 hours a day in deep, deliberate sessions, typically broken into 90-minute chunks with a small rest in between. Top performers rested more than the average ones. and they didn't cram in 12 hours. Then we go into the next research, Cal Newport deep work research. Newport draws from cognitive science to argue that for most people, the limit of deep work is 4 hours per day. Beyond that, mental fatigue degrades both quality and efficiency. There's another study from Microsoft 2022, brain fatigue. Brainwave monitoring showed that back to back video calls without breaks led to cognitive weariness and stress buildup. Introducing even short breaks between tasks resets the brain function and improved attention and accuracy. Though this is something I probably will touch upon a little more. I've spent enough time in the corporate world to see that I think almost 30 to 40% of a week's time, at least I think ideally it's I think 20 to 25% is more than that is kind of spent for most people in meetings that in which they are not even required. There are meetings in which you need to present something that makes sense, but people end up attending a lot of meetings in which they are not required. They just sit in a corner and speak exactly for about maybe 2 to 3 minutes, or they're just silent spectators. Why are they required? God knows. The second thing is um, we don't really need so many meetings per day, right? You can be the CEO, you can be a director in a company or a VP of product or sales. I don't think you really need so many meetings. In fact, in some of the companies that I worked, and particularly in sales functions, I told the sales reps not to do more than 2 to 3 demos per day. Now, you might be thinking if a demo takes 45 minutes to 15 minutes on average, and if you have a 7, 8 hour or even 10-hour workday, why can't you just fill it up with more demos, right? Now, the company tends to benefit from more demos, probably leading to more conversions and more sales, but it doesn't work like that, right? You cannot have a great demo, you being the presenter and presenting the pitch on representing your company. You cannot be in the best state of mind doing more than 2 to 3 demos to the person on the other end. The person on the other end is probably taking 1 or 2 demos a day, or maybe 3 demos. He can probably give you some bit of attention, but you, as a sales rep, do you really think you can do more than 3, 4 great demos in the best shape of your mind? I don't think so. Because you also have other things to do through the day, right? You need to do preparatory material, do research on the person, the company, file all the records in, let's say, SAP or some CRM like Salesforce or Zoho, whatever you use, Freshdesk. You have a lot of other things to do. So you can't be just filling your day with what I call demos, even if you're a great salesperson. Okay, back to the research. Workday output and knowledge roles. Companies like Basecamp, 37 Signals, others observe that their best engineers and designers only produce 3 to 5 hours of high leverage, high quality work every day. They then design shorter work days and saw better for performance, fewer errors and lower burnout. So this from Basecamp, we'll touch that. Now, I also said regarding the meetings that there was I think one of the places where I worked where uh, the entire day was filled with meetings. It was almost 2 to 3 hours of actual work you had left for the day, and otherwise and that too the meetings were pretty long. It's not half an hour or 20-minute meetings, but the meetings were really quite long, sometimes leading 1 hour, sometimes so 2 hours per week, etc. And those were extremely mentally draining. I tend to think that you need to have fewer meetings per day, maybe a 1 or 2. I think 3, 4 per week is more than enough, and those meetings need to be uh, small, crisp, and to the point. Maybe have 3 to 4 small agendas to be discussed for that meeting, and stick the time to about 30 minutes or maybe 25 to 30 minutes. Beyond that, human attention doesn't last. It doesn't make sense. Stick to that. If you're over short on the time in terms of discussing those 4 points, maybe discuss only 2 or 3 and then move the fourth one to another meeting the next day or after a few hours. Cool. Anyway, coming back to the next section on this, the change, what has been happening over the last, let's say, few years, particularly after COVID, things have changed a bit, but let's look at that. In 2022, a pulse survey of 2,000 US workers by insurance company Prudential showed 70% of US workers had prioritized or were considering prioritizing their personal lives over their jobs and careers. 20% said they were willing to take pay cuts if even if it meant they could have if if it meant they could have a better work-life balance. It's a term called leaning out. Engagement rate is declining in the US in the sense that the company that feels aligned with actual work is kind of declining. There's new buzzwords called quiet quitting, soft life, bare minimum Mondays that have emerged on social media. And a lot of people are saying, I don't think I'll ever go back. to the way I used to work before. People don't want to do that, and particularly that's very common with Gen Zs. I mean, I think they're probably the most sorted out beings, compared to how we used to be. They have their priorities very clearly laid out, and they don't compromise much. As the society moves forward, there's a growing consensus that success should not come at the expense of one's health and happiness. Now, this is exactly the crux, right? I mean, I do quite a bit of work on or my podcast on health and wellness, but this is something that I just want to make it clear. I'm not against people who want to work 15, 16 hours. By all means, do that. But your actions and priorities will mean that something else will suffer, and that's mostly your health, little bit of health and family life will get affected. You should just be cognizant of it. Recently, we had controversy around Hardik Pandya was VP of Product, Subramaniam from L&T and Narayana Murthy all bat for very long work hours, more than 60 to 70 hours of work a day, a work week, right? Now, people literally went back and started abusing them. Literally, these are, of course, a lot of them are, some of them are employers and some of them were employees who didn't want to work those long hours. Now, guys, this all, as I said just a few minutes back, it's a conscious choice. You should know what you're getting into. If it's a startup, if it's a company that's trying to move a little faster, they will expect you to do more number of hours per week. Now, it's you as a person who needs to decide what is my priority in the next few years, 5 years, 6 years. Do you have a short term plan? Do you have a long term plan? If it's short term, and if you think that money is your priority and you don't really care much about health and wellness or family life, then by all means go for it. I generally don't believe in this work life balance. It all depends on what kind of priority that you want to have at that point in your life. So it's all quite contextual. That's what I'm trying to say. So, but of course, expecting everyone to do this is not practical. Now, what is happening in most companies? There's something called as Price's law. I think a researcher or a scientist based out of UK, he said this long back that in almost most companies that he looked at, uh, 50% of the actual work was done by, I think, square root of the actual number of people working there. So I'll just make it very clear. Let's say a company had 100 employees, 10 people did almost 50% of the work or the output. If it's 25 employees, 5 employees did 50% of the actual output in that particular company. That's how it works. And that's how it's probably going to be, right? And now with AI, productivity has probably improved. But yeah, cool. Anyway, so coming back to these long work hours, I think it's not quite sustainable, but if you're getting into it consciously, that's a choice that you have taken for yourself. Yeah, so people can technically work 16 hours, but few hours are going to be meaningful output. The rest is often kind of managerial repetitive. So this is something called as fake hours or fake work or a fake productivity where you actually have to pause and think is if what you're doing, or are you just ticking it off or you really think whatever you're doing is moving the needle or moving the ball a little bit, right? You pretty much know. I think no worker is dumb enough to not know whether what he or she is doing is making a difference or not. And it's even worse if you don't know if your work is even making a difference. If you question that, most likely it's not, right? That's how we look at it. But in some companies, what happens? They say you have to work 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours. That's kind of that's how your attendance is marked or your salary is paid. In which case, a lot of people tend to fake productivity. They just sit for the entire 8 hours, munching some Cheetos or chips, going to the coffee table, sitting with the colleagues for the next half an hour, extended lunch sessions, sutta breaks, chai breaks, and other things that don't add much value. But eventually, if you look at it, they would have spent 10 hours to 11 hours at work. Does it make sense? People can answer for themselves. Now, I also said something very important. This is probably the penultimate section of this podcast. A lot of decisions and actions that you take will have consequences. Something will always given based on the choices that you make. So one of the curiosity that I had is how is it that the top lawyers, investment bankers, and some consultants in large companies, how are they able to put in gruesome 80 to 100 hour or even 120-hour work week? How is that even possible humanly when I'm not able to do that at this age? How is that? How are they able to do it? Is there anything that they do especially different? Or are they enabling themselves in such a way that it makes them super productive? I figured that the answer is no. It's again not sustainable, and there have been a lot of research done on their behavior. There have been arguments on both sides, but I'll read through some of the highlights of news bites that I found. Investment banking may cause insomnia, alcoholism, heart palpitations, eating disorders, explosive temper, and failed relationships at home. Yeah. A former Japanese banker is battling burnout. You need to enjoy the ride. Experts link sustained long hours, 55 to 60 hours plus per weekly, to a 35% higher risk of stroke and 17% greater risk of heart diseases compared to those working 35, 40 hours. There's another wonderful link I found, which I will actually link in the description for you to read through from rooted executive treats.com. Wonderful article. It says that stress is very acute, especially in East Asia and North America. 52% of the workers, according to Gallup.com, poor work environment and excessive workloads is shown to harm mental health, and globally about 12 billion work days are lost each year due to depression and anxiety at a cost of roughly 1 trillion in productivity. Stress and burnout are endemic worldwide, is what the article finally says. And then there's a couple of New York Post articles which talks about the brutal work culture of Wall Street, the stock markets and other areas. And apparently, there's another article which says Germany, with lesser work hours, is having higher productivity per hour compared to countries like Japan, India, etc. And finally, it says many top consultants, bankers, and founders report estranged family lives. Now, that's what I said. So, what do I'm not questioning why people want to work 15 sickness. It's up to you if you want to do that. I know many people who've done that. I've done that before a few years back. Uh, Everything has a consequence. So once you prioritize something over the other, which you should at given a point in time on what you think is important to you, you have to know that something else will always suffer, and you have to just bear the consequences of that part. There's a nice table that I prepared, comparative burnout. If you want, I'll just quickly share that, and then we'll go to the next part. So this is the burnout table. Let me make it big, maybe. Yeah. Right, you can see lawyers, consultants, startup founders, medical doctors, and finance professionals, burnout stress indicators, key stressors and impacts, and the attrition that they are being put to. 82 hours, 5 stress, insomnia, anxiety, heart issues, burnout, consulting, 16 80 hours. Deep work causes only 4 to 6. Attrition is 15 to 25%, sleep loss, strained personal lives, etc. So these are some consequences of you putting in very long hours. We just want to be aware of it. And then there's a similar blog that I saw related to banking, where some it's a nice visual, maybe neck and back pain, vision issues, aging of the skin, heart attack and stroke, weight gain, weakened immunity, digestive issues, etc. And some solutions to it. These are some results of humans doing work that they are not built for. From a very evolutionary perspective, we were not used to this kind of work culture right now. Now the question comes again: what do I do? I mean, this is how the world is going to be. How can I acclimatize myself to be reasonably productive in the labor market is a question that you will have. I also have. A lot of people might. So I think the way this might probably work, again, this is my hypothesis and suggestion. You're free to do what you think works best for you. Uh, 4 to 5 hours per day, keep it for deep work in the sense there's no distraction. You should not be checking your phone. You shouldn't be checking unnecessary emails, personal emails, or even delay the emails from office that doesn't require an immediate response or a reward. Just focus, put your phone on. I think Apple, I've started doing that recently. There's a focus mode in Apple or in your phone where you can say I'm work, whatever it is, right? You can create that. You can say from this hour to this hour, don't disturb me. So your calls get muted, your messages, notifications are off. So pretty much you focus on something and you go a little deep into that. There's a separate session that we can do on how to gain, what do you call it? It's called attention or focus. I think this it's actually a complex problem, right? Now, let's say you don't have this distraction and you're still able to sit for you allocated some 4 to 5 hours per day of time of your work day for work. I've still seen a lot of people struggle to even sit for those 4 or 5 hours at a stretch, of course, with breaks. But that focused 4 5 hours, people are also not able to put because their attention is not just there. The work they are heavily distracted. But I think for that it requires a separate session. We'll do that probably later. Considering now that you've established a base of 4 to 5 hours of deep work with good cognitive attention, you can take 3 to 4 items you want to accomplish for the day. Plan it right before you start the work, whatever time it is. Ideally, I think between 9 to 1 is kind of very ideal. 4 to 5 hours. That I think 8:30 to 9, 1 o'clock or 9:30 to 1:30 is kind of the ideal time. And I'll also tell you the reason. Morning hours, you will be at your best. Uh, Biologically, evolutionary, that's how it works. Aligns with the circadian rhythm. So there are exceptions where people say I work best in the night. Yes, there are exceptions, but for most average people like you and me, the morning hours of between 8 till about 1 is your most productive hours. Plan 3 to 4 items that you want to focus on for that particular day, and stick to only those activities in those morning hours. And then what you can do is you can break them down into 90-minute blocks. Essentially, when you have, let's say, 2 to 3 important tasks to accomplish, give 60 to 90 minutes each, depending on what type of work that is. And then remaining half of the day, that is post lunch, when you're going to slow down, your metabolism is going to, your body is going to prepare you for the evening, the lighter load, and sleep according to circadian rhythm. You tend to do shallow tasks, emails, your phone calls, administrative work, filling data in, let's say, CRMs, replying to emails, preparing reports for your boss or for customers, preparing materials, etc. Those can be delegated to second half of the day, or relegated. And then, of course, you have 7 to 8 hours of good sleep, which ideally, I think, what works for on average for most people is 10 to 6. In general, I think 9:30 to kind of 6 is the kind of time you can have a little bit of buffer of half an hour to 1 hour here and there. But if you structure your sleep in such a way that it's between 9:30 and 6:30, that's the ideal slot. So you can do either 10 to 6, you can do 9:30 to 5:30, or you can do 10 to 5:30. It depends on you, but it depends on how many hours of sleep your body is able to is needing, right? Some people are actually okay with 6 hours of sleep. Some are not okay with even 7 hours of sleep, but the average tends to be around 8, so plan it accordingly. Okay, so the question that some of you might have is, okay, it's known that brain will probably have deep the ability to do deep work for only 4 to 5 hours a day. What happens for those um, 6 hours of work? It kind of, the brain also goes into shallow work mode. You will not have that kind of focus. Your creativity will typically drop. Your decision fatigue will kick in, and the amount of mistakes that you will make is shown to increase rapidly. And these are all proven by science. So unless you're a superhuman, you will fall into the average human bucket. Cool. So pretty much that's all I had. There's some more research work that is done, but yeah, there's an interesting company where, Basecamp, I think a lot of people would know about it. They did more work on these things, and their own company that was known for having reduced meetings in a week. They were kind of very focused on being productive as a company, and they do it phenomenally well. They're kind of special in designing a nice culture around focus and restraint and rest. That's how they pull off 40-hour weeks. Sometimes they design 32 hours week, and I think in summers or something like that. Still, they're able to do world class work. Yes, there are companies that will work for 80 hours, 90 hours, still do great work. There'll be companies that do 30 to 40 hours and still do reasonable amount of work. Why you fit in is your choice, but ultimately, it's your life, your health. You figure where your priorities lie, and plan your workday accordingly. In general, I think if you can actually spend 5 to 6 hours of very focused work and move the needle for the company, that's the best spot to be in. Cheers. I'll see you next week with something more interesting. In the meantime, let me know what you think about the work culture around the world, particularly in India, and how it can be improved for you and your company. Cheers.